and welcome here to First Unitarian Society and our Protecting Minnesota Waters three-part series. I'm the Reverend Kelly Clement. I serve this congregation as assistant minister with a particular focus in social justice. So I'm delighted to work with two really crackerjack teams, our Active Voices teams and our Climate Action teams. And they really have brought these three programs together very thoughtfully, and we're kicking it off today. So we hope that there are many folks online who are cozy at home. We are quite cozy and well-fed here at First Unitarian Society. We've had assembly this morning and then a mini meal, and we're delighted to get into this. We First Unitarian Society here at 900 Mount Curve Avenue in Minneapolis sits on unceded Anishinaabe and Dakota lands. We hope, good stewards of this place, and we hope to be good stewards of the waters of Minnesota. This is important to us to do so. Today, we welcome Steve Ring. We are glad to have you here, Steve, with the Sierra Club North Star chapter, part of the Water and Wetlands Stewards group. Steve leads this chapter's team of water experts, volunteer leaders, and activists, the Water and Wetlands Stewards, leading the Sierra Club work at the state level. And Steve, you're a retired Minnesota Department of Health scientist and longtime Sierra Club leader. And you've said that one of your most impactful experiences was serving as technical advisor on the environmental challenge when the state of Minnesota set a sulfate disposition standard to prevent the impacts of acid rain. So you've been in this work for a long time, and we're very eager to hear what you have to share with us about protecting the wetlands. We will have an ask for you today, both those of you in the room and those of you online. There's a postcard that we're sending out today that's been produced by our Active Voices team. Those in the room will find that in the lobby outside, and those of you online will be able to see the link to that postcard in the chat. Thank you, Sandy Dennis, for moderating our chat for us today. And later in the program, after Steve speaks, we'll have time for question and answer. So save your questions until we get to that moment. But do have some questions to ask. With no further ado, Steve, welcome to First Unitarian Society and what you have to teach us today.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for the introduction, and to Marianne for helping to organize this, and Sandy, who's capturing the chat, and the tech crew. I know Bob is handling some of the technology to keep this, or to send this out on the streaming. I know that you're going to be hearing from Peter Wagenius and Paula Maccabee in the next couple of weeks, and I will tell you that they are terrific. I was reminded of a story that Arlo Guthrie tells about writing folk songs. There's this river of folk songs out there, and you go fishing in this stream, and the key to being a really good folk song writer is not to be downstream from Bob Dylan. So I am pleased to be upstream from Peter and Paula, and I hope there's still some good ideas in that stream here to talk about today. As Kelly said, I am a volunteer leader I'm the chair of the Waters and Wetlands Stewards in the North Star chapter of the Sierra Club. And our work is focused on understanding the science, policies, laws, regulations for issues that impact Minnesota's waters and wetlands. We use that knowledge to advocate for the waters of Minnesota, as well as preserving and protecting wetlands. This topic, what are the top water issues facing Minnesota today? if you're at all knowledgeable, you realize that this topic is way, way overambitious and pretty much impossible to deal with everything. There are tons of water issues. But I think we should understand that water is life. The Lakota phrase, mini wachoni, which was used a lot in the protest and the Enbridge Line 3 protests. For the Lakota, water does not only sustain life, it's sacred. And fresh water is necessary for the survival of all living organisms on Earth. The ecologist view, I've always favored. Aldo Leopold is wonderful. Everything he said is wonderful. But he said that we needed to expand our ethics. Our ethics needed to evolve to include a land ethic. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And his view of the land ethic was to simply enlarge the boundary of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. My approach today is to do kind of a high level and then drill down into a few issues. I'm going to focus a little bit on groundwater and aquifers. It was my understanding that part of the impetus for this waters program was some of the stuff from the drought in 2021 or 2020, 2021, and some of the articles that came out regarding that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about groundwater and aquifers and surface water. I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue of mining in Minnesota. There are tons of really good issues I'm not going to focus on, such as PFAS, lead in service lines, public water inventory, Asian carp barriers, wake boats, road salt, the chloride, microplastics, water quality standard for trash. They're all really good water issues out there. They're all tied together, and surface water and groundwater interact all the time. I'm not focusing on drinking water, but obviously the quality and quantity of our drinking water is driven by the quantity and quality of our surface and groundwaters. So my goal is to provide a deeper understanding of some of the complex issues that we face in the state regarding water. I'm going to start. This is a map of surface waters. This is every year the EPA requires the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to develop an impaired waters list, a list of all the waters that are not meeting water quality standards. And this is the current map, 2024. I don't know if you can see this, but there are some purple lines in there. Those are delisted waters that have been removed from the impaired waters list in 2024. But all the red is waters that are not meeting standards. Almost all of the western side and southern part of the state is impaired for nutrients of some sort, nitrate, phosphorus, fecal coliform, E. coli, and total suspended solids, things that are mostly related to agricultural pollution. The northeastern corner of the state is, most of the waters up there suffer from an impairment for mercury in fish tissue. Some of them are impaired for mercury itself in the water column, the concentration of mercury in the water. Other areas of the state, the central part of the state has most of the impairments, and some of them are not showing up because they're impairments in groundwater. This is surface water, but they're impaired because of agricultural pollution. This is a map of Minnesota's groundwater provinces. The state has big variety of underlying geological features, and the glaciers treated different parts of the state quite differently. So we've got groundwater provinces that are quite different depending on where you are in the state. Number one is the metro area, and we're really blessed. I don't know if you can read that little table there, but superficial sands, moderate, buried sands, moderate, bedrock, good. That's basically the best groundwater framework for any of the provinces in the state. We're blessed with lots of layers of sedimentary sedimentary deposits, sandstones, carbonates, things like that work pretty well as aquifers. Plus we have some glacial till that provides superficial material for superficial aquifers. Other parts of the state, number two is the South Central province, and it doesn't have as good aquifers, but it does have some glacial till for superficial aquifers. Number three is, I'm hoping that you've heard of this, the karst region in Minnesota, the southeastern corner, has a lot of limestone and carbonate rock, which over the years, I mean we're talking thousands of years here, it's become like Swiss cheese in some ways. The water has carved actual channels, so water is not filtering through sand or soil or silt. It's just running down the channel right into the groundwater. It's almost like the surface water is the groundwater. They're inextricably connected. Number four is kind of the central sand plains, and they have a lot of sand on the surface and superficial sand aquifers. Not so much for deep aquifers. Number five has got kind of silty superficial aquifers, generally pretty shallow, and then hard bedrock, which makes it difficult to, it doesn't have much for deep aquifers. Number six is almost all, the northeastern part of the state is, well, if you're a canoer, been up to the Boundary Waters, you're up on the Canadian Shield, and you're up on basalts and granites, and it's right there, and whatever glacial till is there is very local. And there's not much for aquifers. This is a map the U of M created. It's kind of a map of pollution sensitivity. And basically what they're doing here is measuring, I think they're taking the 10-foot mark. Oh yeah, the surface. How long does it take for water to infiltrate the land surface to a depth of 10 feet in different parts of the state? And you can see in the northeast that basically it doesn't happen. In the southeast, it's in the karst region, the water is going right in. It's going quickly. There's a few other places, the central sand plains, the water goes down pretty fast through that sand. But that's just a map of kind of the sensitivity to pollution in different parts of the state, or the groundwater sensitivity. Back in January of last year, the DNR gave a presentation to the Clean Water Council. The Clean Water Council is the group that manages the water-related funds that come from our legacy amendment. We're all paying a tiny portion in sales tax that goes to a legacy amendment. That money goes to, some of it goes to arts, some of it goes to trails, some of it is focused on water. And the Clean Water Council is the group that controls that money and figures out the budget and how that money is going to be spent. The DNR gave a presentation to that council about the drought of 2021, 2022. And I managed to get hold of the slides that they presented, and I've got a few of them here, but it was quite obvious that the DNR was surprised by the severity of the drought. It was the most severe since 1988, and the DNR, by law, is required, the commissioner is required to establish a plan to respond to drought-related emergencies and to prepare a statewide framework for drought response. And they do have a plan, and they do have a framework for drought response, but I think that as a result of this drought that they witnessed, that they're going to be updating that drought response framework. One of the lessons learned was they need to continue to drive demand for water down, even in times of abundance. Let's take a look from that report. This is one little snippet from the report they gave to the Clean Water Council, and it focuses up in far northwestern Minnesota. You can see the little star there by the city of Warren. And up there there's basically one aquifer system. It's small and it's slow to recharge. From May through July of 2021, the water table declined by 70 feet. Groundwater levels were the lowest on record. At some point, the DNR had to suspend irrigation permits, and the city of Warren, and then there's a rural water utility that I think in total the city and the rural provide water for about 6,000 people. But they had to drill their wells deeper. This is the water level decline. The DNR has an observation well up there, and this goes from 1985. So this is a long, slow decline that's going on. Basically, they're extracting more water than is going in. And you can see the big dip down there at 2021. This is also came from that slide deck having to do with well interference. What happens in an aquifer? I thought it was an excellent illustration. It's kind of like having a straw in a milkshake or a malt. A thick malt, you can suck away on that straw and all of a sudden you reach the bottom, but there's still a whole bunch more in there. But there's this cone of milkshake that you've already extracted. And that's kind of what's happening in an aquifer. Aquifers they're not a big lake, an underground lake. They're like a big milkshake with lots of sand and silt and other things that the water has to move through slowly. It's kind of like having a bucket of wet sand. The water isn't right there, but you could get to it if you put a straw down there or something. You could pump some water out for a while. But this illustrates what happens when a deep well pulls down a cone of water from an aquifer, and a well that's nearby then is affected and no longer can get water. I'm going to switch. I'm hopping now from northwestern Minnesota up to northeastern Minnesota, and they have limited aquifers because of the bedrock is right there. They have taconite mining, which has been going on for many years. Taconite is an oxide of iron. It's not a sulfide mineral. Taconite rock contains magnetite, which is an oxide of iron. But there is a little bit of sulfate in their ore, and so there is some sulfate that's being put into the water from the taconite mining, and some other stuff that raises some other ions that raise a measure in the water called special conductance. But there's a big threat. There's a band of an arc of sulfide mineralization up there, and there's a threat of copper-nickel sulfide mining, which could produce a lot of sulfate. I want to talk just briefly about mercury and sulfate. And maybe the easiest way is to talk about the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. They have a reservation with the southern boundary is the St. Louis River. And the Polymet proposed a mine upstream. Actually, I can't remember the distance, but it's quite a ways upstream of the reservation for the Fond du Lac Band. And the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of issuing permits if you're going to damage wetlands. So this mine project, this mine project was going to damage or have an impact on 6,000 to 7,000 acres of wetlands. In the state, we have a Wetland Conservation Act, and for mining, it's administered by the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. In other cases, wetlands, the Wetland Conservation Act is administered by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. But, so if you damage wetlands, you have to agree to mitigate that somehow and find wetlands somewhere else. But you also have to meet a part of the Clean Water Act called Section 401, which says that you won't hurt the water quality of the surrounding water in doing whatever project you're proposing. So the state of Minnesota, the MPCA, looked at the Polymet thing and basically gave it a green light, said, yeah, it's fine. The MPCA is the one that makes the decision on the Section 401 water quality. The Fond du Lac Band filed a formal objection to the Army Corps of Engineers saying that, hey, wait a minute, in 1996 we established water quality standards at our reservation for the St. Louis River, and we have standards for mercury and standards for special conductants, and we think they're going to be exceeded based on the activities of this Polymet's project to create this mine and damage the wetlands. And what they contended was that the building of the mine and operation of it was going to have an impact on the wetlands, hydrologically changing the water levels. A lot of this is peatland. I'm not going to go into. There are lots of formal peatland stuff, ambitrophic, and anyway. But in the process of doing that, especially when there's more sulfate around, there are bacteria that use sulfate when there's low oxygen in an anoxic environment. There are bacteria that will process organic material and use sulfate, convert the sulfate to sulfide, and in the process, they will break down that organic material, releasing some nitrogen, some phosphorus, but if they have the right gene in the bacteria, or the wrong gene, they will also convert inorganic mercury into methyl mercury, a variety of mercury that can be taken up by biological critters. And then it gets magnified. You know, the fish eat the little fish eat the critter, the big fish eats the little fish, and so the mercury gets magnified in the fish tissue. The band made a formal objection. The Army Corps of Engineers passed this on to the EPA. The EPA gave it to their research group. And the research group came back and said, yeah, you know what? The band is right. The operation of this proposed mine could easily have an impact on the water quality at the reservation, both in terms of mercury, higher mercury, and in terms of special conductants. So excuse me, the addition of sulfate and the disturbance of wetlands easily and often generates more mercury in the biotic system. Let's see, central Minnesota, I'm jumping again, hopping off northeast, going to central Minnesota. Sandy soils with agricultural pollutants that descend easily into the groundwater. Big ag fields that depend on irrigation. This is where you may have heard of the pines to potatoes thing, where the claim is they're cutting down pine trees and planting potatoes. The big R.D. Offutt company that provides potatoes to McDonald's for French fries. At any rate, there are some of the rivers there. The Straight River near Detroit Lakes is high in nitrates, and I thought I had some, maybe I need a quick drink. When I was putting this talk together, I ran into kind of an interesting thing in central Minnesota, and I haven't solved this completely, but it appears that the Straight River, that the groundwater has become so polluted with nitrate that it is the source of nitrate in the Straight River. The surface water isn't getting that much nitrate. It's like this nitrate is going down through the sand so fast that it's not being transferred into the surface waters, into the streams and rivers, but where the river contacts groundwater, it's getting nitrate. So when when the amount of precipitation and surface water is low, the Straight River is high in nitrates. It's kind of a weird switch around. I'm still researching that one, but it's just an interesting tidbit. Twin Cities metro area. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we are blessed with many available aquifers, but we have a very high demand for water. Some lakes have high chloride, road salt concentrations. In fact, some lakes are what are called meromictic lakes, where they don't turn over. Normally in Minnesota, most lakes turn over in the spring and the fall, but because chloride has a higher density, it sits down near the bottom of the lake and it doesn't turn it over, which lowers the oxygen down in the benthic, or the lower part of the lake. And during the 2021 drought, many cities exceeded their permitted water amounts. Some metro areas experienced well interference, like I described earlier. In Blaine especially, there were many reports of well interference. There are some high levels of neonicotinoid pesticides. They're sometimes called neonics. They're based on the nicotine chemical, and they've altered what you get from smoking. The nicotine chemical has been altered to make pesticides. So they're called neonicotinoids, or neonics. But for some reason, one of the chemicals is kind of high in the Twin Cities, and that's like another thing I need to research. I'm going to show you a map in just a moment of the Metro Council report, which shows declines in the Prairie du Chien and Jordan aquifer. It predicted in 1940. We have PFAS contamination, especially on the east side of the metro. Lead service line removal was heavily funded by the last legislative session, which is wonderful. Here's the map of the Metro Council, by law, has to produce water plans. And this happened to be a study from 2016 that they did of the southeastern part of the Metro Council. The dark blue is where the aquifer is about 40 feet down. So this is what they're projecting for the year 2040 for the southeastern metro, you're kind of looking at Scott County. And this isn't very far at all from where the Niagara Bottling Company was proposing, at Elko New Market, they were proposing a plant to come in and bottle water and ship it around the country. Southeast Minnesota, we could do a whole session probably on Southeast and the karst geology. I hope you're familiar with the fact that the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy recently petitioned the EPA, basically saying that state government agencies, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, were not adequately protecting the residents from the nitrates and agricultural chemicals that were in the water in that area. And the EPA agreed with them. And the state agencies are just developing a plan. On Friday, I just received something from the PCA. I haven't even read it yet, but there's a plan to deal with this issue. Let's talk a little bit about ag pollution. I think, if you stop and think, well, if I could fix one water issue in the state, what would have the biggest impact in terms of improving water quality in the state? And I think it kind of comes down to ag pollution. It's a super complex issue, and there's no way you can just fix it. It's going to be worked on from all different angles, and nitrate, fertilizer, manure, soil health, all kinds of factors are going to be in there. But we've seen a tremendous expansion in growing corn and soybean as row crops. The ethanol market, I think about 40% of Minnesota's corn goes to producing ethanol. And the ethanol market and market forces have led to large increases in those row crops. There's not as much oats and alfalfa and pasture land and other things that there used to be. We've seen farms take out their fence rows and go right to the edge of the property lines. We're treating soil as a substance that will just hold up the plants. It's not like, we don't expect the soil to have any nutrients. It's just a substance to hold up the plants. So we're going to put all the nutrients on it to make the plants grow. Pesticides and herbicides are often in the seed coatings or applied preemptively. Some soils are very sandy and require big irrigation because they don't hold much water, so you got to keep watering them. Many parts of the state's agricultural region are heavily tiled. I have a quick picture of tiles here coming up. And we've also destroyed a lot of wetlands, and they're destroyed or compromised. I ran into a tidbit just the other day. There was a federal statute in the mid-19th century that provided for the sale of swamps at a discount to farmers, contingent on their drainage of the land and use for agriculture. So we were promoting it. The one other tidbit that I will mention is that a lot of lands have been removed from the Conservation Reserve Program. This was a program that paid farmers to put land in reserve, and a lot of those are gone. A lot of that's is gone now. Here's a quick picture of tiling a farm field. What this is they call it tiling. It used to be done with clay tiles, actually, but somewhere 2 to 5 feet below the surface of the field, you put these pipes that have holes in it to extract the water. The water runs out down the pipes into larger pipes and down into your drainage ditch or your stream or something like that. So it gets the water off the land much faster, causing all kinds of problems. So the results are most of the agricultural parts of the state have surface water quality impairments for nutrients or bacteria. Much of the groundwater is contaminated with nitrate and other chemicals. Community water supplies struggle to meet the nitrate standards. Private well owners must contend with elevated levels of nitrate. Increased health impacts, the blue baby syndrome, cancers, other things. Pesticides are found in our rivers and wildlife. Here, I don't know if you can read this, but the right-hand column is the percentage of private wells. This is in southeastern Minnesota, all of the counties in the southeast. And the right-hand column is the greater than 10 milligrams per liter, which is the standard for drinking water for nitrate. A lot of people believe that anything over 3 milligrams per liter could be hazardous. That's the column just to the left of it. So if you look at a county like Wabasha or Winona, the two above the total line, you've got 30% of the private wells are above 3, or 54 or 50 some percent are above 3 in Winona County. It's really a bad situation. Pesticides, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but they're often embedded in the coating on the seeds that are planted. They're systemic. The nicotinoid are systemic. The plant takes them up, and all of the plant becomes toxic to insects eating it. Interestingly, the EPA estimates that only 5% of the pesticide in seed coatings is actually taken up by the plant. The rest of it's going into our water. And as a kind of a crazy tidbit, the DNR did a study of spleens in 2021. They tested 800 deer spleens. 61% contained neonic concentrations all across the state. So I don't know if they were eating the seed. When you coat those seeds, then some of those don't get planted. So now they've got toxic waste, all these seeds that are coated. They're trying to figure out what to do with it. In fact, the PCA right now is trying to come up with a rule for how to handle pesticide-coated seeds that are no longer viable for planting. Here's a map of 2 of the neonics. One is imidacloprid, the one on the right. Clothianidin is on the left, and you can see generally it's the agricultural part of the state that is high in detection in rivers and streams. So, actions to ameliorate. How can we stop some of this agricultural pollution? There have been several voluntary programs on fertilizer, pesticides, manure spreading guidance. The Department of Agriculture has a certification program. Pollution Control Agency has been tightening their feedlot permits. They've been doing this for 10 or 20 years, and there's just there are questions about whether that agricultural certification program works. There are questions about whether the Department of Agriculture's best management practices for farming actually work. They're still pouring nitrate into our streams and rivers and into our groundwater. The item at the I'll mention the One Watershed, One Plan is an effort by the Board of Water and Soil Resources to at least coordinate how we work with a watershed and work to plan to try and remove problems. By doing One Watershed, One Plan, watersheds obviously cross county boundaries. And it used to be we had all these different plans and all these different things. Now they're finally starting to get coordinated on trying to deal with some of those problems. And the last item, the MDA, the Department of Agriculture, Minnesota Department of Agriculture, has finally stepped outside of a voluntary requirement, and they have come down with an actual rule, a fertilizer requirement to protect sensitive geological soils and drinking water supply management areas, which are affectionately called DWSMAs. Yeah. At any rate, here's a map of the fall fertilizer restrictions. And you can see the karst area in southeastern Minnesota, very strict rules for fertilizer. These are interesting. If you ever want to be appalled, go read these fertilizer restrictions. There's all of these exclusions, and it is incredibly detailed in terms of who can put what, where, when. The whole northeastern corner, that yellow in the far northwest, is excluded because of climate, because of how soon the first frost comes or something. But at any rate, this is a big step. The Department of Agriculture has finally come in with an actual rule that they can enforce and that they're working on. I think I'm going to hop through this. There's lots of stuff out there. Maps, if you like maps, there are tons of really good maps of things. There's a digital water research library. There's Department of Agriculture produces water quality monitoring reports. There's a legislative subcommittee on Minnesota water policy that meets, and they're actually going to have I think the next meeting will be, there's going to be a talk by someone from, one of the big national groups is going to talk about neonicotinoid pesticides in Minnesota. I'm going to try and make that talk. It's called NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. There are lots of programs that are working to protect the water quantity, the groundwater. And one of those, there's a statute that basically says the Mount Simon Hinckley Aquifer, which is the one at the bottom of the metro area, is highly restricted in terms of, the commissioner may not issue new water use permits that will appropriate water from the Mount Simon Hinckley Aquifer unless the appropriation is for potable water use. And there are some other things with it. But so we might want to be doing that for some other aquifers or think about restrictions on these things. I mentioned the Metro Council by statute has to produce a water report, and you can go out and get those from the Metro Council. The DNR has a drought plan. I mentioned this Legislative Committee on Minnesota Water Policy. And I also talked earlier about the Clean Water Council. The U of M was required by the last legislative session to come up with a framework, not an actual plan, but a framework for developing a plan for a 50-year clean water plan. And they have produced that report and sent it to the legislature. It's available. I think some of this is pretty obvious. In conclusions, agriculture pollution is a huge, complex problem. We need to work to keep the water on the land and not going into our groundwater and into our rivers and streams. Wetlands, buffer strips, plant winter crops, don't leave bare soil out there. If you're going to do tiling, then that big pipe should go into some kind of a digester or into some kind of a wetland that's going to process those chemicals before they go into the streams and rivers. Promote healthy soils so there's nutrients in the soil that will hold water better. Support continuous living cover, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide. Oppose sulfide mining, develop robust water plans. Legislative needs. We need more support for the U of M's Forever Green program. They are developing perennial crops that can be used on fields. We need prove-it-first legislation for sulfide mining, which says we're not going to ban sulfide mining, but you have to show us somewhere in the U.S. that you can run a sulfide mine for 10 years and not pollute everything. And then we'll allow it here in Minnesota. fully fund that U of M 50-year plan. And Kelly Morrison, the senator, is planning to introduce legislation to do that. I'm assuming there'll be something coming from the House as well, but we need to get on board with that. And that plan also calls for a whole bunch of task forces. And you people need to get on those task forces. You know, we need to get on those task forces that are working on that 50-year plan. Support legislation to protect lowland conifers. This kind of keeps the logging out of the peat bogs, keeps them from tearing up the wetlands, keeps that carbon that's stored in those black spruce and tamaracks, and keeps the carbon there. And we need to do something to promote better manure management. Map where it's spread. We don't even know where it's going now. Reduce the number of allowed animals, improve inspections, get better permitting for digesters. There's a lot of stuff we need to do. I think maybe put higher fees on fertilizers. You know, get some money out of ag to help pay for some of this stuff. And thank you very much for listening and for arranging and organizing this. And if you've got some questions, I would be happy to try and address them.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Wow. That was incredibly comprehensive. I know there was a lot that you wanted to cover and couldn't. The first question I want to ask on behalf of everybody is, may we share your PowerPoint out with folks who might want it?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
We've got that PowerPoint, and so we'll figure out if that request should go to, you want that request to go to you, Marianne? Do you want it to go to me? How about to me? If everybody knows how to reach me, if you want access to this PowerPoint, reach out to me and I'll be happy to send you the link to it. And thank you for that, because what a wealth of information. Yeah. What questions do you have that we can ask? Steve, you got the expert in the room, and Sandy is also monitoring questions from folks online. So we have maybe 10 minutes for this or so. Oh, good, Mickey, thank you. Thanks for getting us started.
Sure. Hi, thank you for that. That was great. I'm a member here. I'm also the editor of Minnesota Women's Press. Our March issue is about plants and climate change. I just interviewed a VP of Farmers Union in Minnesota who has an organic farm. One of the things that she said is, like, even with the Paris Climate Accord, farmers weren't actually at the table. And one of the things I don't know yet, so I'm wondering, do you know who's in Minnesota at that table in terms of discussing how ag does fit into the picture? I'm sure there's agriculture people there, but I'm just not sure who's making decisions about how to do things better around ag and the stuff you've been talking about.
Yeah, I think that's complicated because there are lots of different forums, and you could probably interview some environmental groups that say, we're not at the table for that forum. So I think that we absolutely need to work across the board. We need to have, the Corn Growers Association, and we need to get people on board. My particular group, the Water and Wetlands Stewards, we kind of recognize there are some groups that are just so far out in front of talking to farmers, and the Land Stewardship Project, for instance, I'll mention them. There's a Soil Health Coalition in Minnesota that's working. They're out there out in the field working with farmers. The Department of Ag has some different forums where they are trying to bring people together to work on some of these issues as well. I don't know if I've quite answered it, but maybe we should move.
Thank you, yeah. Other questions in the room? All right, Kathleen, have you got a question for us?
Well, actually, I just want to talk about how toxic the the engineers, Army Corps of Engineers is, and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, they all are interested in getting business in. They don't give out, I'll say what my dad used to say, a rat's ass about what happens to our climate or to our soil. And I also know about the karst in southeastern Minnesota. I've heard about it for years. In fact, there was a farmer that wanted to put like thousands of dairy cattle down in that area, and I think it was stopped. And I just want to say one thing about the legislator down there. The congressional legislator, a Republican in the 1st District, was saying how disgusted he was that we are talking about nitrates that are hurting people in southeastern Minnesota. He doesn't seem to give a damn as to what happens to the people in his own district.
That's really hard to take. It is really hard to take. So, as Adele just reminded me that our work today is to sign the postcard. Sign the postcard. That's part of what our Active Voices does, and we'll put the link again for the folks online so they can do that action also. Do we have any questions from online? Okay. Yeah, Audrey.
First, a comment and a question. One of the things, my brother is a farmer. I grew up on a farm in south central Minnesota. It's been a long time since I've been there, but my brother turned it into an industrial hog farm, which saddened me a great deal. But anyway, one of the things I'm constantly reminded, having farmers in my family, is that they are responding to the markets. And we are part of the markets, the food we eat and what we want. And they think they just want to make a living and survive. And so we should, I think it's helpful, and I tell this to myself too, is these are folks just like us who want to make a living. And this is the road that they've seen the best way to do. That's what my brother said. And actually, back in the 1970s, the University of Minnesota was encouraging industrial agriculture. So this is a very deep and complicated problem. They've since changed. But my question is, of these groups, and as we get involved, how can we, or do you see ways, avenues? I'm familiar with the Land Stewardship Project, which is wonderful, and I encourage people who aren't familiar with them to support them, but maybe there's other organizations. How can we, who care about this issue, sort of see our outstate citizens, residents of Minnesota, as partners with us, as opposed to, because this attitude of we're going to come and regulate you, that's really an antagonistic approach. Not that I'm opposed to regulation, there needs to be regulation, but do you have any thoughts about just working on this from a very human perspective?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very perceptive point and question. I agree entirely that the farming community, they're not our enemies. You know, we have, in a sense, we have led them to this situation. We're all part of this. It's all a community, in a sense, that the kinds of meat that we eat, the kinds of choices that we make in the market, the things that we support in the government, all of those things lead the farming community to make decisions. And in some cases, I mean, I may have sounded really critical of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for working on a voluntary basis. In many ways, I think that's the way to do it. If we can we can bring people along with training, with developing some other crops or some other ways for them to go. One of the things I don't think I mentioned here, but I thought I had in here, one of the things is supporting, more support for developing markets for perennial crops. I mean, it's one thing for Forever Green to go out and develop kernza, which is, I think, a perennial ryegrass or wheatgrass. And, but if there's no market for it, it's, yeah, okay, that's nice, that's cute. We need to work with the farmers, we need to work with the markets, we need to work with General Mills or somebody to say, hey, we've got this product, can you incorporate it into your products so that we can start moving in this direction? It's not simple. You know, one of the reasons I think the Land Stewardship Project is so good, they go out there and they work in the farming community. They've got people out there on the ground. They hold breakfasts, you know, and I think they maybe have done some down at the Capitol even, but, you know, they're out there working with the farmers, trying some things. I think that our U of M needs, and our Ag Department needs to really work on the economics. You know, how can we you know, do some test fields, do these more test plots. There's some of that going on already, but let's try and demonstrate that farmers can make a living by using slightly different methods. Figuring out economic ways to capture what comes out of farm tiles, you know, or digesters. How do we better handle manure? Can we more efficiently handle it? What we're doing isn't really working. And we need to figure that out, but I agree entirely with you that this has to be kind of a community effort, and finger pointing just isn't going to work, despite the fact that occasionally we might feel a little like, come on. But it's challenging. It's a challenging situation, yeah.
Thank you. Let's take one more. Okay, hang on a second. We got to get the microphone.
It was new to me. I don't know if anybody else saw on CBS Sunday Morning this morning, there was a segment on collecting human urine and using that for fertilizer. And I mean, it's happening in Vermont, and it kind of surprised me. I don't know whether there's anything better in human urine than other sources of nitrogen. Maybe the same problems exist, but at least economically, it might be more, you know, economically good for the farmers.
Well, thank you for that. Do you want to comment on that at all, Steve? You're not required to.
I might skip that one.
You're going to skip that one. I want to just, are there any online questions? Okay. We know that you have all the wisdom online, but and we'll send out the link to you if you want to. This program will live on our website on the FUS. Sorry, on our YouTube channel, and I think there will also be a link to it on our website. So if you enjoyed this, you can share it out with other people, and after we've done the other few. Thank you again, Steve.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Setting it up.
Yep. I want to say a few other thank yous. Thank you to Margaret Levin of the Sierra Club for helping this to happen. Special thanks to Marianne Lundquist for all of your efforts in making today happen. And the whole Active Voices and Climate Action teams. They've just really worked hard to pull it all together. Your work right now is to go out to the lobby and sign the postcard, if you have not done so already. Your work online is to click on the link that Sandy is going to put in one more time, please and thank you. to click on the link to create your own message to send to Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. And then next week, please come back at this same time and space to hear Peter Wagenius, who will talk to us about some things that we can expect coming up in the next legislative session. Really tuned into what's happening there, and we're looking at what will happen in this coming session. And then the following week, we'll have, I hope I'm going to get this name right, Paula Maccabee from Water Legacy. Will talk to us again. So these three things coming together really are going to hopefully get us energized for the work that we can do. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming and for spending part of this cold day in this warm space, and I hope we're energized to keep moving on. Go